So those who were here yesterday know that we had a lot of universities work and primarily focused on industry academic engagement. Today, we're going to have a lot more technical talks, and part of that will be people who collaborate with Purdue or SMEs from other organizations, but it's also an opportunity for us to highlight some of the fantastic research and researchers who are here at Purdue. So our first tech talk today is going to come from Dr. Kate Seigfried-Spellar. And it's always, Kate has quite a reputation, has won numerous awards the last couple of years, and is having an unbelievably distinguished career. And while I can take no claim to it, I feel like such a proud father, because I actually remember Kate when I first started, when she was working on her PhD here at Purdue, left and was faculty elsewhere. And how many years ago now? Is it 7, 8, 9 years? 7 years ago, we're able to entice her back to Purdue and is running some phenomenal programs in the Polytechnic at Purdue. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Kate Seigfried-Spellar.
How does this sound, everybody? Thank you. Does this sound okay? Can you guys hear me? Yep. Okay, brilliant. So I will warn you, we're going to be talking about child sexual exploitation and grooming. So that's my kind of heads up that this is a socially sensitive topic, but it's an important topic. And so I do have some photos that are related to some of the grooming analyses that we do, just as a heads up. So the big thing about this is I was lucky enough to get to do some of this work while I was in Spain for 4 months last semester on a Fulbright. And the speakers before were talking about the importance of training data. And that is very important when we start talking about law enforcement investigations. So we have spent I think we started this project in 2016, trying to build those relationships with law enforcement so that they trusted us to give us this sensitive data. And to do this, it's a really unique relationship that we have here at Purdue University. We have the Tippecanoe County High-Tech Crime Unit. So the work that I do would not exist without them and their support. And so I'm deputized through the prosecutor's office to be able to work these types of cases, which is very unique because in the United States, civilians cannot access this type of data unless they have law enforcement status. That's different than other countries. Again, I have to start off by thanking them and, again, building those relationships. So we work with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force across the United States as well to collect data. And then some of the data that I have today I'm going to show you is from 300 sex offender cases that I received from the National Spanish Police by working with the Ministry of State for Security there. So, again, many years in the making because, well, again, if we don't have data, then anything that we create from a machine learning standpoint is useless, right? We know this. So when we start talking about online enticement, so this is very different from a, kind of shifting cybersecurity focus here. We see that there are going to be different types of offender motivations. So when we start talking about the conversations that offenders are having with minors, sometimes the motivation is going to be to have sex in the real world. We call them contact offenders. Sometimes it's to receive CSEM or child sexual exploitation material, those photos, those sexts that minors will take. And other times it's just a role play and have a sexual conversation. So the big problem, though, is how do we know which one law enforcement are dealing with, right? If they are seeing an increase in cases, which because of COVID, everybody going online, we saw a 35% increase from 2020 to 2021. The data from 2022 hasn't came out yet, but we know that we're seeing an increase even more substantial. So again, everybody's online, everybody's using technology, and now we have more photos, more victims, more offenders, right? So again, from a law enforcement standpoint, how do we target those high priority offenders, which is our contact offenders? So these are just some more statistics to give you an idea from the Internet Watch Foundation. This is from the UK. So the UK said that the majority of these images are going to be between 11 and 13-year-olds, and they're self-produced. So these are kids on TikTok, Instagram, name your social media application that are taking photos and posting them. That's what we mean by self-produced. Now, sometimes they're going to be coerced, right? They're going to be encouraged to take the photos. They might be said, we'll give you money or we'll do X, Y, Z. But the point is that the majority of the photos that we're seeing that's circulating right now, the minors are taking themselves. So this is also part of the problem. So from that high priority standpoint, when we start talking about trying to prioritize these offenders, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they say that about 30% or 1 out of 3 of the offenders that chat with minors online are going to be contact offenders. So from a law enforcement standpoint, those are our high priority. These other 2/3, yes, it's illegal, but we really want to stop those contact sex offenses from occurring before they meet in the real world, right? So this is where we start saying, well, we know that they have different motivations, so maybe they chat differently. Maybe we can tell based on the conversations which ones have that motivation to meet in the real world, and can we start looking at the sex that they're sending? And can we start identifying offenders based on their biometrics? And so from my standpoint, I'm a forensic psychologist in training. I do have a background in digital forensics as well. And so the majority of my research has been on understanding the grooming process of child sex exploitation offenders. And so when we start talking about grooming, we tend to think of it as the sequential process, right? Where we start with friendship forming, relationship forming, and so on and so forth. But in fact, we see that they test the waters continuously throughout the conversation. So the offender might start off with, hey, send me a sext. So they might instantly start with that more sexual stage. And then they might move it back, depending on how the minor responds. And we see this both for contact offenders and non-contact offenders. This interesting risk assessment gets triggered, especially when we're talking about undercover law enforcement investigations. So if a law enforcement officer doesn't respond in a way in which a traditional minor will, then the offender starts getting suspicious, right? They'll start saying things like, send me a photo of you holding a sign with my name on it, right? Because they want to know that it's a real minor and not a law enforcement officer that they're talking to. So part of our research too is how do we minimize risk assessment? How do we minimize kind of triggering those offenders when they are being involved in those undercover sting operations? So we see too that minor or that offender spray and pray, meaning that they are contacting a bunch of victims at the same time and then they're waiting to see which ones respond. This is important because from a authorship attribution standpoint, we can then look and say, does this offender who's chatting with this minor sound like the same person who's chatting with this other minor? These are things that our natural language processing experts can start to look at. And most importantly, what we see is that the majority of these conversations have sex, right? These offenders are sending pictures to the victims. So now we want to start looking at, well, what can we pull from those images? Some of the other tactics, right? How do we get these minors to send photos? Well, they're saying things like, I'll show you if you show me. I love you. I would never share this image with somebody else. Maybe they offer something in return like money. And then the last one is something called capping. So this is where they will encourage the minor to maybe flash the camera or to do something sexy, and then the offender uses screen capture, right? Takes a quick capture, and now they have a sext or some sort of sexually explicit image that they have created. We also see this quite a bit with live stream abuse cases as well. So we start saying, okay, we know that they're communicating, they have different motivations, we know the grooming strategies. Let's start to analyze the way in which they communicate to see if there's differences, and there are. And one of the theories that we looked at was something called self-disclosures. So when you start looking at your own relationships and your kind of real world, the people that you tend to be the closest with are people that probably suffered similarly, right? So if you have, think about your best friends or somebody you're really close to, maybe you both really connected because both parents are divorced. You both lost a loved one. Maybe you're both had a parent who passed away, or whatever it is. But we tend to connect over negative experiences. Nobody connects over we both got a raise, so let's be best friends, right? Like these are not like, oh my God, I got a new car, me too. Like that's not what happens in the real world. We connect because of the negative experiences that we have, and it's so nice to meet somebody else who understands what that feels like. So we started to think, well, maybe if we do this as adults, maybe these offenders are doing this with the minors as well, without realizing it, right? They're trying to build that trust. And it's true. We started to see that they are using more self-disclosures. These contact offenders, when they are chatting with the minors, they're sharing sad stories. They're talking about being bullied when they were a kid, or how their parents didn't love them, or maybe their dad was an alcoholic. And then these minors are reciprocating and saying, wow, you understand what I'm going through right now. And so they really are. This is how they're building that level of trust. When we start talking about fantasy offenders, or those offenders that are more interested in obtaining sexually explicit material, they don't need to build that trust to meet in their physical world, right? They're using different types of tactics. And the tactics that they're using tend to be things like, wow, you look really beautiful, you should take more photos, right? They're using more compliments and flattery versus sharing sad stories. And so when we started to look at this, we said, okay, well, are we seeing this in other languages as well? And the answer is yeah. So when I was in Spain last semester, and we had our 300 sex offender cases, we worked through, we analyzed the chats, and we saw that the contact offenders use a lot more verbs to show emotion and to show affection. And they, like this, you know, you're the love of my life, I love you so much. And then we saw that the fantasy offenders used more commands. Take this, do this, show me this. So again, we can start to see, just based on communication, a hint at what the offender's motivations are. But again, if Dr. Julia Reyes was here, she would say the devil's in the details, right? So she's my natural language processing expert, my colleague that I'm incredibly lucky to work with. These offenders don't spell things well, right? Neither do the minors. They're using kind of the acronyms and this crazy different language that constantly is changing as well, right? Even as parents, you know, you have to try to figure out what your kid is saying when you're reading their text messages. Things are misspelled, you have text distortions, and again, we're dealing with multiple languages. So with our Spanish chats as well, we have Catalonian as well. We saw some of the chats that were the difference between Spain and, let's say, Spanish in Mexico, for instance, like the dialects are different, right? And so these are some of the problems that our algorithms have to be able to analyze. But from a brain standpoint, we can read that sentence, right? The devil is in the details. And I have chats where the offenders think that there's algorithms, or they assume that there's algorithms looking for full text words, and so they take the spaces out because they know we can still process that data. Now here's those photos I warned you. This is an actor, FYI. I took this from his TikTok page. So biometric data. So we started to say, okay, we know that offenders are sending pictures. What can we get from this? The easiest would be facial recognition, because we already have algorithms that do that, not hard to do, and fingerprints, right? We have APHIS, for instance. So if we could start to pull fingerprint data, we could process that data quite quickly through our national law enforcement database. However, these are horrible photos. The offenders are really smart nowadays, and they take these photos without their faces in them. And when they do have their face, a lot of times the camera covers their face, and then we just get the flash. So facial recognition does not work very well. And even though these are pretty high quality iPhone pictures that I pulled, the fingerprints are not great. The quality's not there. We were really frustrated. And so then we said, well, what else can we do, right? Maybe there's another form of biometric that we're seeing in these photos that's just not as common because people rely on other things, right? And that's what we see. These are gorgeous knuckles. Beautiful knuckles, right? So this was an offender who's like, look, I bought you a ring. We also, you may not know this, but your knuckle is unique, just like a fingerprint. I know you guys can look right down at them. There they are. You can imagine what this is representing, but I get a lot of those that are sent, and these photos have what we call nail beds. Your nail beds are unique as well. So if we can start to say, look at that, look at that nail bed, look at that thumb knuckle. Now we start having different biometrics, and the offenders don't think about it, right? They're sending these photos to the kids. They're more worried about their face, maybe more worried about covering up a tattoo, but things like this they're not considering. And here's a great example of this. So this was a case that was published in Spain in 2022, where this was a photograph of an offender, and they were able to have the offender hold their hand in the same position and match the knuckles and nail beds. So this can be done. The problem, though, is it takes a long time, right? And so right now we actually have a team that is developing the algorithm that will go through the videos and the photos, crop quickly the knuckles, because we want to reduce law enforcement's exposure to these images as well, right? So instead of watching a 20-minute video, if we can say, hey, frames 5, 6, and 22 have knuckles in them, that limits exposure. Law enforcement can then examine those and then run it through our knuckle algorithm. I was a jail officer before I became a professor. And so I understand the process of booking. Right now, we do not take photos of hands unless there's a reason to do so. Traditionally, we just take photographs of tattoos, obviously mugshots for the face, both sides, and then any tattoos or scars, those tend to be the things that get kind of photographed. So this would be easy though, right? To incorporate a DSLR camera to look at taking photographs of the hands. Something to think about. And this is where we are today. So we have spent several years. This has been funded by the Department of Justice. And again, incredibly grateful to have access to this type of data. We are building an algorithm that will analyze the chat that is coming through. It gives a risk assessment of the likelihood of being a contact offender. It then pulls the photos and identifies any knuckle biometrics, or we're working again on nail bed and full hand as well. And here is an example of that authorship attribution where it's looking to see if this chatter sounds like anybody else in the database that they've seen before. Okay. I could not do this without the complex team that we have, right? Complex problems need a diverse army. And I really think that if I had one thing to say to you is that these problems, whether it's a cybersecurity, very technical solution or something like grooming and child sexual exploitation, is that we can't just have technical solutions, right? You need to have somebody like me who understands the contact offending behavior. And what I do is I provide the features to the natural language processing team that they can then build the algorithms around, right? I'm the one that has the law enforcement background that collects the data that law enforcement trusts. But I need a biometrics expert. I need my natural language processing. Dr. John Springer is the one that's looking at network traffic. He's our network forensics guy. And then finally, we're looking at grooming from an annotation standpoint as well, and that's Dr. Ringenberg. And of course, we've got experts from the University of Kent. I'm working with Valencia and fantastic research assistants here at Purdue. So these problems, again, take a diverse team, and that's one thing that I would really encourage everybody to think about. So what is the future of child sexual exploitation? Tech solutions, right? So a couple things. Obviously, the more chat data that we have, the better our algorithm is going to be. So I've been working with ICAC, receiving data. Sometimes I fly there during their investigations because it's easier for them to give me the data on site rather than trying to send it to me. We've had to work with Purdue's legal team, you can imagine, and institutional review board. Faculty in here know what I'm talking about. That's been a fun process, but Purdue has been incredibly supportive of this research and work. Again, somebody mentioned bias before, very important. The more diverse our data, the less bias it's going to be. And so we've been trying to get data from around the United States, and we've done a pretty good job of getting data from almost every state so far. And the more updated the data, the more likely we are to be kind of representative of some of the different chats that are occurring currently, right? So not using old technology, but having access to, Instagram. We see quite a bit of WhatsApp currently, and so on and so forth. When we start talking about text algorithms, we've been collecting data from Spain. I'm also currently working with Germany, so the goal would be to give this tool for free to everybody with law enforcement and to have an algorithm that analyzes the chat data based on whatever language it is. So that's the goal. That would be my ultimate goal someday. And again, we currently have data from Spain, and I'm working with Germany right now. Future of biometric analyses. So maybe we should start thinking about having a hand database, right? For those offenders that are coming in, you could take photographs of their hands, and then again, if there's an image that gets sent to a minor, you could run it through and compare it. Because right now, we don't have that. So this is going to be an individual law enforcement-based type database versus it being a national one. So this is something that we're hoping to work with the Department of Justice on. And of course, there's always other biometrics that are sent through these photos, and I will let you guys imagine what that is. But I tell you, there are more. And I talked really fast because I wanted to leave time for questions, and that's it. Oh, thanks. There's always one in the room.
Have you considered what the potential downside of this technology in the wrong hands could be? Like like Russia or Iran or Saudi Arabia using to go after political people and things like that? Is there ways of protecting the code so that it can't be reapplied in things in a negative way?
So honestly, that has not been something that I've considered or has been on my radar. This is currently a code that's only going to be available to law enforcement and will be specifically the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force through the FBI. And then obviously we're developing a similar one for the Spanish National Police. But that has not been something that I've been worried or concerned about.
Wonderful. Catherine, thank you very much.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, guys. Oh.
Are chat platforms being cooperative of this research?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
No.
Who isn't?
So what I will say is that it has nothing to do with the research specifically, but they're not cooperative when it comes to law enforcement investigations in general because of the importance of privacy from a civilian standpoint, which I can absolutely respect, right? So what happens is that we have to submit a request of a search warrant to ask for them to send us the chat data. Sometimes they comply, sometimes they don't. And so that's also been part of the problem. The majority of the chats we're getting, though, are parents that are coming forward saying that their kid has been talking to somebody and they're concerned, or it's something where the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children has been flagged that this conversation is occurring, and then we get a tip related to that. Yeah. It's a good question, though.
You said that some of the things you look at, the language changes rapidly, kids text language changes all the time, that sort of thing. Do you have sort of the ability to update the algorithms? Is that built into the system?
Yeah, so that's also one of the parts that Dr. Reyes has been working on, is that as you feed more data into it, the algorithm is going to continuously learn, correct? Yeah, absolutely.
I guess there's that kind of organic change you've got to keep up with, but also the offender's behavior could change as a response to this itself. When they realize their knuckles are suddenly...
I know, so don't tell them.
Yeah.
I know, but don't worry, because they send other things too. So there's lots of biometrics.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, but I do think that for the most part, especially like in videos, I mean, it's amazing how they forget, and we see all kinds of things, and they're smart about their faces, but their hands, tattoos, it's all there. Yeah, the background of the room is another one. There's great, like Photo DNA is an app that you can that looks at those types of things, but yeah, that their hands are almost always in. I mean, it's unfortunate, but their hands are always in these photos or these videos. Yeah. No, it's okay.
Is there any data? Is there any data that
So as far as like from a law enforcement standpoint, like the... Mm-hmm. So we've been focusing mainly on law enforcement data, simply because we want to have those use case situations so that we know what they're seeing and what we're building applies to it. We've had to start with constrained data, and we've had grad students come in and like hold objects, which is hilarious because they don't know why they're doing it. We're like, yeah, just hold these water bottles and we're taking photos of your hands. And so we've been kind of starting there and then applying our algorithms then to these real cases that we're seeing within law enforcement. But I haven't thought about kind of expanding out. Oh yeah, that would be very valuable. That's the stuff that I look at when I'm giving the features to Dr. Reyes when she's developing her algorithms. Yep. So we've been like looking at demographic data, looking again at the kind of the conversations like I was talking about, using command words or those are some of the things that I'm looking for. Yep, absolutely. That'd be very helpful. Yeah.
Thanks again, Kate.
Thank you.